This story kicks off in a drugstore where Ruby, the kingdom's most renowned alchemist, was crushing the self-esteem of her assistant, Lloyd, to dust for being a useless, brain-dead, incompetent fool. For years, Lloyd had served as Ruby's assistant, yet this girl treated him worse than a toilet brush. Ruby was not only his boss, but was also supposed to be his partner and lover, but she had turned their relationship into an emotionally abused type, where Lloyd suffered. To the entire kingdom, Ruby appeared as a kind-hearted alchemist, an impeccable genius who had invented numerous magical tools and drugs that cured fatal diseases. But to Lloyd, this girl was nothing but a pen-sized demonic dictator in a lab coat, a perfectionist tyrant who'd sell her own mother for the perfect potion. Everyone knew alchemy was a two-person gig involving an alchemist who crafted the ideal healing recipes, with an assistant mage who gathered the materials. However, according to statistics, Ruby stood out as an exceptional genius, boasting a result rate of 100%, while in contrast, Lloyd struggled with a mere 40% success rate in finding materials, far below the average assistant mage's expected 90%. Frustrated, Ruby angrily expressed her dissatisfaction with Lloyd's incompetence, prompting Lloyd to apologize and swear to do better next time. Yet, this only fueled Ruby's rage. She hurled an object at Lloyd and yelled at him never to apologize. Then, she slapped his worthless face, pointing out that his abysmal rate embarrassed her as everyone in the kingdom gossiped about her incompetent assistant. Furthermore, Ruby shouted at Lloyd to stop apologizing because it annoyed her to death. All he needed to do was get better at his job. However, at that moment, Lloyd reflected on how he had become nothing but a laughingstock to the entire city and how Ruby had always oppressed him with her power. Finally, Lloyd grew fed up and resolved never to continue with his miserable life. Determined, Lloyd made it known to Ruby that he was tired of being her assistant mage and, in fact, was leaving the kingdom for good. Even after hearing this, Ruby dismissed his words as the mere cappings of a delusional madman and assumed Lloyd merely needed a day off. Seeing her indifference, Lloyd screamed, declaring that from that day onward, he was done with their toxic relationship. Convinced that anywhere but Ruby's torturous lab would suffice, Lloyd decided he needed to escape as far as possible from the evil hobbit before she destroyed what tiny manhood he still had. In the next scene, Lloyd sat in a park, pondering where a monumental loser like him would go from there. Suddenly, he spotted a dragon soaring in the sky, unbound by any rider, simply spreading its vast wings in total freedom. Overwhelmed, Lloyd instantly began dropping tears like bombs, while yearning that all he wanted was to live as freely as the dragon. As he moved out of the city gate, Lloyd swore to hit the reset button on his sorry life. As a result, he boarded a carriage heading for the neighboring town. Sitting beside him inside the carriage, however, were two lovebirds, Mars and Lyra, who whispered sweet nonsense to each other while engaged in some cringy PDA. This irritated Lloyd to no end, for love was the last thing he needed at that point in his life. Still, he couldn't help recalling that his love relationship with Ruby was nothing resembling to what Mars and Lyra's had. Ruby had always been domineering, even when they were just teen lovers. Years ago, when they first met at the orphanage, Ruby found Lloyd crying like a sissy over an empty stomach, so she angrily tossed him bread and warned him to stop being a disgrace to humanity. Ruby bragged she would become the greatest alchemist the country had ever seen one day, and if they worked together, they'd have plenty to eat. Ruby asked Lloyd to be her assistant. And the broke idiot, young and hungry, eagerly accepted. From that point onward, they focused on their roles, Ruby as the alchemist preparing recipes and Lloyd as the assistant gathering materials. Eventually, Ruby earned fame and the title of Alchemia Steel, a one-of-a-kind aristocrat, while Lloyd could only cheer from the sidelines. However, from that day, the accolades went to her head. Gradually, Ruby's human nature eroded, transforming her into a monster with a heart as cold as your toxic ex when she cheated and blocked you. Suddenly, in the present, the carriage crashed into something and jolted to a stop, sparking panic. Lyra, slightly shaken, mentioned that she could hear the coachman screaming outside for some reason, while Lloyd inquired whether the sudden halt was because of a monster. In response, Lyra, slightly irritated, was surprised that the quiet, brooding weirdo finally spoke. Immediately, however, Mars apologized to Lloyd for his girlfriend's silly comment, but Lloyd brushed it off, noting that Gen Z baddies always got an attitude. Meanwhile, Lyra stepped outside the carriage and nearly wet her undies in pure, undiluted fear upon sighting a massive, scaly worm towering before her. Mars, on the other hand, moved forward to protect his girl, even at the cost of his life. But Lloyd approached Mars at that moment, giving him bro-to-bro advice not to throw away his life for Nyash and informing him that he'd fought the worm before. Lloyd explained that the worm's head was its Achilles heel. Slash it with a sword, and it could be defeated easily. However, Mars pointed out that reaching the monster's head seemed impossible, given its enormous size. Just then, mid-conversation, the giant worm charged at Mars and his girl and was about to send them to the pearly gates. But in a swift main character move, Lloyd yanked the helpless couple out of harm's way and, wielding his Merlin staff, obliterated the monster with one powerful magic blast. Witnessing such a powerful attack, Mars and Lyra stood astonished, especially Lyra, who couldn't believe such a feat was possible. As the journey resumed, Lyra, now in full fangirl mode, praised Lloyd's magic skills and confessed that she was a low-level mage. Desperate to level up, Lyra threw herself at Lloyd's feet, begging to become his student. She also took this moment to apologize for roasting him earlier. Lloyd, being the bigger person, accepted the apology and reminded her that young people make dumb mistakes all the time. Hearing this made Lyra burst into tears of gratitude. Excited yet curious, Lyra demanded to know the identity of the great mage before her. Lloyd then asked if she'd heard of Ruby, the great alchemist, to which Lyra, fangirling hard, replied that Ruby was the GOAT, the renowned alchemist famed for her incredible inventions. With that confirmed, Lloyd cleared his throat and inquired whether Lyra knew the name of Ruby's famous assistant. Disdainfully, Lyra responded that the assistant was far from famous, but rather infamous, known as the notorious screw-up whose failures cost Ruby money. Hearing this, Lloyd could only bow his head in shame, while Lyra questioned why he'd asked about Ruby's assistant. Filled with shame, Lloyd admitted that he was the very assistant she'd just roasted harder than barbecue, leaving Lyra popping her eyes in shock. As they disembarked from the carriage and stood at the town's entrance, Lloyd recounted his painful history with Ruby to Lyra and Mars. Lloyd revealed that he'd quit being Ruby's assistant and had come to the town to start afresh. Deeply moved by Lloyd's tale of abuse, Lyra praised him as an amazing mage who just lacked confidence in his abilities. Together, Lyra and Mars promised to help Lloyd get back on his feet, and with that, they stepped into the town, united in purpose. Stepping inside the bustling city, Lyra and Mars introduced themselves as adventurers and then inquired whether Lloyd would like to join them in the adventuring business. But Lloyd declined, asserting that he wasn't cut out to be an adventurer. Undeterred, Lyra, aiming to persuade him, bragged about how they made crypto money as adventurers by just slaying monsters, collecting loot, and exploring dungeons. Nevertheless, Lloyd remarked that being an adventurer sounded suspiciously like his old job, except with a daily dose of insults from a tiny, psychotic boss, and then suggested they continue the discussion over lunch. Mars and Lyra, hellbent on fixing Lloyd's train wreck of a life, shoved a paper at him during the meal, demanding he list jobs he'd actually not suck at. Lloyd considered numerous options, yet he still couldn't write a dang thing down for a few minutes. Watching him struggle, Mars whispered to Lyra that Lloyd must have sacrificed his dreams for Ruby. Lyra then turned to Lloyd and informed him to think outside the box by including jobs he had never considered before. Eventually, Lloyd scribbled something down and handed the paper over to Lyra. Lyra scanned the paper and realized that every job Lloyd had listed reflected his fear of Ruby tracking him down like a Psycho X. Mars, trying to work with what he had, suggested Lloyd open a tool shop since he was a walking encyclopedia on materials harvesting. Lloyd mulled it over but quickly dismissed the idea, fearing Ruby would waltz into his shop demanding free supplies. Next, Mars pitched the idea of carpentry, but Lloyd, the pessimist, imagined the evil leprechaun showing up and forcing him to roof an entire castle out of spite. Running out of ideas, Mars pleaded with Lloyd to join them as an adventurer. Lyra supported the suggestion, assuring Lloyd that the odds of Ruby finding him were slimmer than Zendaya's waist, and even if the evil roach did, he alone could decide whether to work for her again. Nearly in tears from their kindness, Lloyd agreed to become an adventurer, fully aware it was high time he stopped living in a past dominated by fear of Ruby. Upon arriving at an inn, Lloyd bade farewell to Mars and Lyra, promising to meet them at the guild first thing the next morning to register as an adventurer. With that, Lloyd entered the inn, resolute in training his skills for his grand debut at the Adventurers Guild the following day. Later that evening, while practicing, Lloyd was ambushed by two jacked-faced thugs. The one with a head like a pineapple demanded that Lloyd surrender all his cash, but before Lloyd could respond, they were abruptly struck by an ice blade erupting from the ground. Stunned by such advanced magic, Lloyd turned to see who cast it and was astonished to find a smoking hot chick standing before him. Meanwhile, the thugs, enraged by the attack, charged at the girl. Realizing, however, that if this mysterious ice princess unleashed another spell, the town might turn into the North Pole. Lloyd took it upon himself to subdue the thugs by smashing their skulls into the dirt with his magic like a budget Hulk. Once the thugs had been dealt with, Lloyd faced the girl, explaining that using an ice spear in town wasn't exactly the most brain cell efficient move, and then cautioned her to be careful. Impressed by how effortlessly Lloyd dispatched the thugs, the girl apologized, thanked him for saving her life, and then noticed a scratch on his cheek. Leaning closer, she assured Lloyd she excelled at healing magic, healed him, and then introduced herself as Iris. Lloyd, still recovering from the close contact moment, asked if she lived in town, to which Iris casually replied that she had just arrived that day. Surprised, Lloyd noted the coincidence and shared that he, too, had just arrived. Intrigued, Iris asked about his occupation, and Lloyd declared himself an adventurer. In turn, Lloyd inquired whether Iris worked, and she admitted she was currently unemployed. Curious, Lloyd asked why she'd come to the town, to which Iris explained she came only to enjoy the town's famous tapioca milk tea. In response, Lloyd assured her he knew the perfect shop to find some. But just then, Iris glanced at a tall building, mentioning it was growing late and her attendants would be waiting at her inn. Hearing attendants, Lloyd deduced the girl must be loaded, probably a princess fresh out of her royal castle. So, he tried rizzing Iris up with a cringe Discord pickup line, asking if she was a rope because he'd love to hang with her. Amused, Iris smiled, impressed, and agreed to linger a bit longer. Then, Iris requested a favor, and Lloyd, still simping hard, eagerly offered his help. For her request, Iris pleaded with Lloyd to assist her in finding her way home. Meanwhile, as Lloyd and Iris conversed, Lyra and Mars lurked behind a building, observing the exchange like two gossiping old women. On the other hand, Lloyd readily agreed to help Iris find her way home, so he suggested they visit the Adventurers Guild, which was the best place to find reliable directions. As they stepped inside the guild, they encountered some angry-looking dudes who instantly recognized Lloyd as the incompetent deadweight hindering the kingdom's greatest alchemist and charged at him. Without hesitation, Lloyd gripped his Gandalf staff and summoned ensnaring vines from the ground, trapping the meatheads and squeezing them tighter than your undersized jeans. The more the brutes struggled, the tighter the vines gripped, though not quite as tight as your mom held onto me last night. Just then, a commanding female voice boomed from the top floor, demanding to know why the guild had suddenly turned into a WWE match. Turning, Iris recognized the fiery baddie as Isolde. Curious, Lloyd asked Iris if she knew the chick, and Iris revealed that Isolde was her bodyguard knight. Simultaneously, Isolde spotted Iris beside Lloyd and was dumbfounded, wondering why the Holy Saint was in the Adventurers Guild. The second the adventurers at the guild realized Iris wasn't just some random pretty face, but the actual saint of the kingdom, they flung themselves to the floor, groveling at her feet and apologizing for attacking her. Yet Iris, being humble, urged them to rise, claiming they must have mistaken her for someone else. Lloyd, still clueless, asked one of the groveling fools what was so special about being a saint. Irritated by the question, the adventurer explained that the saint was the kingdom's sole possessor of a unique ability known as the Holy Law Power. According to him, this power could revitalize even life itself and transform barren, dead land into a flourishing expanse. Furthermore, the dude with a fat head elaborated that regions untouched by this holy power were deemed uncultivated territories, teeming with high-ranking demons. Additionally, the eye patch clarified there was only one saint per nation, and since Iris's birth, the entire country had pampered her. Meanwhile, Isolde fumed over the fact that the guild's adventurers had dared lay their filthy hands on the saint. So, in a fit of rage, she angrily announced that every single one of them was demoted to R rank as punishment for their actions. In tears, the pathetic adventurers pleaded for forgiveness, feigning ignorance, while Iris, too, interceded on their behalf, and then stunned Isolde by declaring she was no longer a saint. Iris explained that a new saintess had already been appointed to replace her, but the adventurers suspected she was capping to spare them punishment, and even Isolde struggled to believe it. Later that night, outside the Adventurers Guild, Lloyd apologized to Iris for being the reason she was attacked, claiming it was due to his trash-level reputation. Instead of replying directly, Iris simply stated she enjoyed their time together and then pleaded with him not to apologize. Playfully, she leaned closer, flirting with Lloyd a bit, and remarked that she might start expecting too much from him if he spoke too formally. Glancing at the wall clock tower, Lloyd asked Iris if she'd like to have a bird view of the city, to which she eagerly agreed. Effortlessly, Lloyd scooped her into his arms like a low-budget Superman, activated his physical enhancement magic, and soared with her to the tower's rooftop. There, they marveled at the city's skyline, a sight that visibly delighted Iris. Thanks to the magic light stone crafted long ago by the great mage Hecate, the town glowed brilliantly day and night. Meanwhile, back at Ruby's lab, Ruby was not having a good day. The castle auditor had just delivered the worst news possible. Her rank was being downgraded to B rank because she couldn't keep up with orders. Ruby begged for an extension, arguing that her assistant was coming back soon and that this was all just a minor hiccup. But the auditor, clearly not buying her delusion, just shrugged and left. Now officially in panic mode, Ruby started seething. It had been 3 whole weeks, and that little traitor Lloyd still hadn't crawled back. Worse, the guy she'd paid to get materials had ghosted her at the last second. Deep in thought, Ruby resolved that one day she'd reach Chronicle Class Alchemist status, just like Hecate. When that day came, she wouldn't need Lloyd, not even for the smallest task. For now, however, if business were to proceed as usual, she'd need to find a new assistant mage. The next morning, Lloyd strolled into the Adventurers Guild, all pumped for his test, only to start sweating bullets when he couldn't spot Mars or Lyra. Moments later, Isolde strode into the guild, dragging Mars and Lyra's limp bodies across the floor like they were last night's trash. Shocked to see the couple looking like they slept in the dumpster after having a hangover, Lloyd listened as Isolde explained that Mars and his babe had been ambushed that morning during an expedition. With a stern expression, Isolde noted she'd heard rumors about Lloyd and demanded to know why he'd chosen to come to the town. Suspiciously, Isolde reasoned that something odd was afoot since, within a single day, the St. Iris had visited the guild, her adventurers got jumped, and in both cases, Lloyd was conveniently in the middle of all. Consequently, she concluded that if Lloyd posed any threat to the town, she'd have to order him to leave the town in the guild's name. Just then, Mars regained consciousness and loudly asked Lloyd if he'd finally become an adventurer, alerting Isolde to Lloyd's intentions. In the next scene, Isolde, Lloyd, Mars, and Lyra rode in a carriage toward the guild test location. This site housed the Trial of Crystal, which every new recruit needed to touch. When Lloyd inquired about the crystal's purpose and why he had to interact with it, Isolde explained that the crystal, a hidden treasure, measured the strength of those who touched it. Additionally, she revealed that it could disclose a person's vocation, aptitude, and personal diagnosis. However, inwardly, Isolde believed the crystal would unveil Lloyd's true nature and help her deduce his reasons for coming to town. Soon, they reached the Temple of Wind, where Isolde informed Lloyd that the crystal resided on the tower's top floor, though they'd need to eliminate several monsters to get there. While ascending the stairs, Lloyd, with his big mouth, decided to ask Isolde if she'd touched the crystal and, if so, what her vocation was. Annoyed, Isolde snapped that her vocation was none of his business, but suddenly, Lloyd alerted the team to the presence of monsters on the floor. Monster spiders and beetles swarmed from every direction, attacking the group. One of the monster spiders was burnt to a crisp by Lyra, while Isolde, using the power of the wind magic, was able to repel and fight off some of the insects, leaving Lloyd in awe. Lloyd, on the other hand, used his physical enhancement ability to evade the attack of the spider, and then, using lightning magic, he was able to send a beetle, attempting a sneak attack from behind, to the afterlife with an electric shock that could have powered an entire village. Observing Lloyd's skills firsthand, Isolde decided to probe him further for answers. She inquired to know what Lloyd would do when faced with a monster stronger than him. Grinning, Lloyd replied that he'd bombard it with 16 consecutive bursts of explosion before retreating. Hearing this, Isolde became even more intrigued about Lloyd's true identity, knowing that the 16 bursts of explosion were the highest level of magic. After defeating all the monsters, the team decided to have a lunch break based on Isolde's orders. Isolde brought food to the team, and as they chewed on it, they realized the food was better than Gordon Ramsay's and were shocked that Isolde wasn't only good in combat, but she could throw down in the kitchen as well. Isolde casually explained that as the only daughter of the lord of the town, she had to learn all kinds of skills to live up to her family's name. After the meal, Isolde directed the team to resume their climb to the tower's summit. While ascending, Lyra whispered to Lloyd that she suspected Isolde was desperately hiding her crystal-revealed vocation like a cheating girlfriend with a WhatsApp message and asked if he wasn't curious to know. Shrugging, Lloyd admitted that even if he was dying to know, people often guarded such secrets fiercely. Eventually, they reached the top floor and found the trial crystal as anticipated. To show Lloyd how it worked, Isolde grasped the crystal and asked it to reveal her abilities. In response, the crystal clearly stated that her abilities were advanced magic and swordsmanship. Before she could pass the crystal to Lloyd, Lyra shouted like a Karen, demanding the crystal disclose Isolde's vocation. Instantly, the crystal announced that Isold's top 3 vocations included martial arts, and though Isold chanted cancel to halt it, the crystal persisted, revealing her final 2 as Holy Knight and Baker, leaving everyone stunned and Isold utterly humiliated. An awkward silence ensued until suddenly, a massive griffin swooped in from nowhere, crashing into the ground and sending the group sprawling. In the chaos, Isold fumbled the trial crystal, and the griffin swiftly snatched it with its beak, demolished the tower's roof, and soared off, leaving Lloyd lamenting that he never got to know his vocation. The team immediately chased after the griffin. Lloyd, desperate to get back the crystal, quickly zapped lightning magic at the griffin, but the creature dodged the attack with ease. Lloyd immediately cranked it up with thunder magic, but the sheer force of the attack nearly toppled the entire tower to the ground. To prevent anyone from getting hurt, Isold suggested that they off the beast, but this time they used common sense rather than reckless magic. Unfortunately, the griffin suddenly vanished from sight. That's when Lyra's 2 brain cells finally clicked. Instead of chasing the griffin blindly, she asked the crystal for Isold's favorite food, and the crystal instantly exposed Isold's deepest, darkest secret food, a fluffy cake. Armed with this embarrassing intel, the squad tracked the griffin's location, occasionally tossing in more humiliating questions about Isold just to hear the crystal snitch, causing Isold to turn redder than a lobster in embarrassment. Eventually, they cornered the griffin in a tight corridor, but this creature was moving like it had a nitro boost. Realizing they needed speed, Lloyd activated physical enhancement magic, launching the entire team forward like they were the Justice League. Meanwhile, outside the tower, some guild nobodies loitered like bored housewives, gossiping harder than a knitting circle on wine night. One dude with a tragic hairline speculated about Lloyd joining the guild, while another, rocking a face even a mother would not love, joked about how Isold was probably grilling Lloyd to death with her harsh training. Their chuckles were cut short when the griffin suddenly came bursting through the walls, nearly giving them all a heart attack. Before they could scream, Lloyd and Isold, still in hot pursuit, scooped them up like ragdolls and dropped them off to safety. Isold then ordered Mr. Receding Hairline to lead the team and evacuate the tower. Back to the action. Lloyd finally trapped the griffin and bombarded the bird with water bullets, but all he did was renovate the tower against his will. Realizing he needed to lure it outside, Lloyd dramatically swore he'd do whatever it took to get that crystal back. Isold, watching him, started connecting dots like a detective in a crime show, and the only answer her chicken brain could come up with was that Lloyd needed the crystal so he could seize St. Iris's powers, given he already had her under his balls. At that moment, Lyra, growing impatient, stepped forward, activated silence magic learned from Lloyd, and vanished from the griffin's sight. With the beast unable to detect her, Lyra leaped skyward and, wielding her staff, whooped the head of the griffin so hard the bird practically coughed out the crystal it had in its mouth. Everyone's eyes widened in astonishment as the crystal emerged. Without wasting a second, Isold and Lloyd dove desperately to catch the crystal ball like Andre Onana on a good match day. But ultimately, Lloyd secured it and immediately asked the crystal to reveal his vocation. After a brief silence, the crystal declared that his vocation was to serve Ruby for life. Stunned, Lloyd's eyes bulged out in shock like spongeballs as he recalled a past traumatic moment when Ruby caught him reading alchemy books, kicked over the fire stand to set the books ablaze, and decreed that as her assistant mage, he was forbidden to study alchemy. In the present, Lloyd could not control the tears from dropping as he questioned why life was cooking him harder than a broke dude on a Black Friday. He lamented to Isold about how he had been cruelly fated to do Ruby's bidding for the rest of his life and how he didn't want to live such a miserable existence. Lloyd declared that all he wanted was to change his life, yet even the universe conspired against him. Mid-lament, however, the overgrown bird staged a sudden comeback, charging straight at Lloyd. Fortunately, Isold intercepted the assault with her blade. While grappling with the griffin's claws, Isold advised Lloyd that despite the crystal's grim prophecy, his life's final decision rested in his hands. Furthermore, Isold shared that she was destined to be a baker, bringing joy to people with her delightful cakes, yet she chose to become an adventurer instead. After this pep talk, Isold announced she'd push the griffin out of the tower with all her strength and instructed Lloyd to strike it with full force. She executed her plan, and without a second thought, Lloyd first unleashed wind magic, followed by thunderstorm magic, obliterating the griffin into nothingness. As the dust settled, Lloyd gently placed the trial crystal back on its slab, where it belonged. Isold, stepping up, admitted she'd misjudged Lloyd, suspecting he'd come to town with some evil scheme in mind, and then apologized for her hasty judgment. Smiling, Isolde assured Lloyd that if he wanted to start over, the town wasn't such a bad place, and she was very much rooting for him. Gratefully, Lloyd thanked her, and Isolde, not yet finished, announced that to celebrate his passing the adventurer's test, she'd treat him to something special, prompting a sheepish grin from Lloyd. As the team exited the tower, Mars and Lyra rushed over, congratulating Lloyd on becoming an adventurer, and informing him that he could now take weekly quests from the guild. Feeling the love from everyone, Lloyd felt confident he could thrive in that very town. Meanwhile, a few days later, at a downtown inn, Iris's steward, Nero, cheerfully brought a delicious meal to her room, only to learn from one of the maids, Sephilia, that Iris had left early for magic practice. Furthermore, Sephilia added that since Iris's return, she'd been acting oddly hyper. Disheartened yet irritated, Nero wondered if Iris's sudden change in behavior was a result of this mysterious mage she had recently met. Anxiously, Nero pressed Sephilia for details about the night Iris and Lloyd met. Calmly, Sephilia explained that on the night they arrived, Iris had snuck out in the middle of the night, and that was when she encountered Lloyd. Infuriated, Nero shouted that Sephilia should have told him sooner. Convinced Iris had been ensnared by a scammer with mystical riz, Nero informed Sephilia that he'd join the next escort to confront the wretched fraud himself. A week later, at the Adventurers Guild, Lloyd had been partnering with Mars and Lyra for missions, completing them with remarkable speed. However, Isolde, who surprised everyone by baking a massive cake for the group, advised that Lloyd should attempt a solo mission rather than glue Mars and Lyra like a leech. With that, Lloyd accepted a solo task to eliminate goblins deep within the Great Forest. Though tormented by Ruby's devilish voice in his mind, Lloyd remained determined to act on his own terms. Consequently, after the mission, he resolved to cook his favorite dish, pot au feu, despite devilish Ruby pressuring him to make curry instead. While preparing the meal, he heard a sudden water explosion behind him. It turned out a rushing stream had surged to his location, carrying an unconscious Iris within it, startling Lloyd. Immediately, Lloyd pulled her from the water and demanded to know what had happened. Now awake, Iris explained that she'd been practicing magic by the river when something went awry, and the current swept her there. Anxiously, Iris mentioned her concern for her servants, who'd be having a meltdown about her safety. However, Lloyd assured her that once her clothes was dried, he would take her to her servants. In the meantime, he asked if she'd like to try his favorite dish, to which Iris eagerly agreed. Just then, Lloyd noticed the river had soaked his cooking pot, diluting the food, and he began lamenting his inability to even prepare his beloved meal. As he sat in despair, Iris approached the pot, tasted the dish, and cheerfully declared it delicious. Surprised, Lloyd thanked her and then shared that the meal was also the favorite of his childhood friend, a mage. Additionally, Lloyd confided to Iris that his friend had dreamed of becoming the kingdom's greatest alchemist, while he was just like her errand boy, someone who helped her out and did as he was told. But then, Iris responded that success in any endeavor required others' support. She further praised Lloyd as the type who aided people, expressing her deep admiration. Lost in the moment, Lloyd gazed into Iris's eyes, wishing he could restart his life with her beside him. Lloyd admitted to Iris that he'd initially believed escaping Ruby would fix everything. Yet, since arriving in the new town, he'd realized that without changing his mindset, nothing would improve. Nodding, Iris agreed, and then revealed that her refusal to change had cost her the saintly title. Meanwhile, peering through peculiar binoculars, Nero, accompanied by Sephilia, watched Iris eat Lloyd's food and fumed, wondering what Lloyd was feeding her. On the other hand, Lloyd resolved to learn more about Iris's maids since he could tell they were important to her. Before Iris could respond, her head maid, Teru, emerged, so Iris had to introduce her to Lloyd. Teru thanked Lloyd for looking after Iris, then promptly scolded Iris for recklessly training advanced magic. Iris apologized but explained that to live free of the saintly burden, she needed to become stronger, not just for herself but for others, too. Lloyd, touched by her words and compassion for people, pleaded with Teru to let him teach Iris basic magic skills. This made Iris excited, but Teru warned that if she sensed any danger, then she would have to stop the training. As Lloyd and Iris departed for the training, Nero raided Lloyd's camp like a budget CSI, hunting for evidence of malicious intent toward Iris. But instead of uncovering dark secrets, he found Sephilia living her best life, stuffing her face with Lloyd's cooking like a shameless foodie. Sephilia praised the meal and then urged Nero to try it. Hesitantly, Nero agreed, reasoning that as Iris's chef, he must sample everything she ate. Upon tasting the food, Nero's senses evaporated, overwhelmed by the dish's astonishing flavor. Meanwhile, by the river, Lloyd was giving Iris a masterclass in water bending like the Avatar. He taught her how to fire water bullets, and even considered teaching her the legendary water dragon move, but figured it might be too risky. Nearby, Nero and Cecilia, perched atop a cliff overlooking the stream, decided the moment had arrived to eliminate Lloyd before he could harm Iris. Armed with a radish like it was Excalibur, Cecilia unleashed a radish splash toward the water. But instantly, Lloyd conjured a water dragon that neutralized the attack and drenched Nero and Cecilia. Spotting them, Teru immediately berated Nero and Cecilia for their rash behavior. But suddenly, however, a massive legion of fish erupted from the river. Stunned to his core, Lloyd couldn't fathom why such a high-class monster lurked in a tranquil river. Lloyd launched a flame arrow at the legion fish, but the fish continued to charge towards them with great speed. At that moment, Lloyd clocked that the big fish was just a swarm of tiny ones, so to destroy the fish monster completely, he'd need to target the swarm of tiny fish forming its body. Meanwhile, Iris attempted to assist by firing ice blades at the fish, but her spell merely froze the river, trapping Lloyd within. Unfortunately, her attack enraged the monstrous fish, which then launched a swarm of razor-sharp piranhas at her. Yet, before harm could reach Iris, Teru dove in, shielding her. In the process, Teru got ensnared, leaving Lloyd no choice but to go reckless mode and blast the entire area with explosion magic, completely nuking the monster and releasing an unconscious Teru into the water. Seeing Teru unconscious, floating in the river and at risk of drowning, Iris panicked and, without realizing it, summoned a water dragon, astonishing all present. The water dragon scooped Teru up like an Uber ride and safely dropped her on the shore. Eventually, Teru regained consciousness and praised Iris's magic. Awestruck, Lloyd stood dumbfounded, unable to believe Iris had mastered water magic so swiftly, and even saved someone with it, a feat he found truly remarkable. Just then, Nero approached Lloyd, thanked him for saving their lives, and apologized for being a great nuisance. Likewise, Teru expressed gratitude for Lloyd's care of Iris and vowed to repay his kindness later. Same with Cecilia. Shortly afterward, while Nero prepared some freshly grilled monster fish, Lloyd reflected on how, in just a few weeks in town, he'd taken down a sandworm and a griffin, both high-class monsters. Iris felt it was not normal at all, and something was definitely wrong. Nero chimed in, suggesting that the holy power of the temple might have weakened, allowing powerful monsters to encroach. Curiously, Lloyd mentioned to Nero that the griffin had attacked him at the Temple of Wind, prompting Nero to reply that a problem must exist since temples naturally boasted the strongest holy power and weren't places high-class monsters could invade unless something was amiss at the Temple of Wind. Iris made it known that every temple had a magical barrier tougher than plot armor, designed to keep high-class monsters from breaking out. But, of course, each saintess had the unenviable job of keeping the barrier intact by making sure the shrine inside the temple was in order. Furthermore, Iris emphasized that a high-class monster appearing at the Temple of Wind signaled a disruption within the shrine. Shortly afterward, the team pulled up in a carriage at the Temple of Wind, where they discovered a breach in the barrier. Shocked, Lloyd found Isolde receiving treatment with Lyra at her side. Observing Isolde's severe injuries, Lloyd demanded an explanation. Isolde recounted that they got attacked by a horde of 3 griffins, and even though they had managed to hold them off for the time being, she was certain another horde was on the way. Additionally, Isolde informed Iris that they'd summoned the nearest saintess, but since she was so far away and might as well be traveling via Turtle Express, her arrival could take 2 weeks. Recognizing the danger of delay, Iris volunteered to venture into the shrine's depths and perform a cleansing ritual to restore the barrier. That said, Cecilia practically begged Lloyd to play bodyguard, arguing that Iris would be safer with him around. Even Chef Nero, the culinary bodyguard, jumped in, saying he wouldn't be able to season his food in peace unless Lloyd tagged along. With that, Lloyd, Iris, Cecilia, and Nero entered the tower and started their journey to the deepest part. After walking quite a distance, Nero was suddenly ambushed by a monstrous spider from above, but Lloyd acted swiftly, electrocuting the monster instantly and saving him. Nero was pulled from beneath the spider, while Cecilia the glutton was only concerned if the dead spider could be eaten. Just then, a king beetle came charging at the team, but Cecilia, gripping her sword tightly, activated Holy Slash and lunged at the beetle at hyperspeed. Effortlessly, she took down the beetle, astonishing Lloyd, who marveled at her swordsmanship, only to learn from Iris that Cecilia was once a holy knight like Isolde. Meanwhile, after defeating the beetle, Cecilia collapsed from hunger, so Lloyd began chopping the juicy insect into pieces. Before he could hand the disgusting nightmare to her, Nero swooped in, collected the mess from him, and salt beat it with potent spices to mask the odor. Nero then presented the food to the bottomless pit, and she devoured it with gleaming eyes, even complimenting the gooey mess as yummy. Suddenly, Lloyd received an urgent message from Lyra, warning that high-class monsters had invaded outside the tower and were heading their way, urging them to erect the barrier ASAP. As the team hastened to the shrine, minotaurs built like whey protein powder advert models barreled toward them. But Iris, wielding water magic, repelled them backward. Ophelia then slashed them with her sword while Lloyd finished them off with a magic explosion. Efficiently, Nero, the resident chef, diced the minotaur's remains into bite-sized portions, and the team ate heartily as they pressed on to the shrine. Finally, they reached the shrine, and as they stepped inside, Iris rushed to begin the cleansing ritual, only for flying daggers to rain down on them from all directions. Turned out someone had put a bounty on Iris, and the hired goon showed up dressed like a peacock cosplaying as a rejected Sonic villain. Without hesitation, Nero and Ophelia lunged at the fashion disaster assassin, but as she leaped high to dodge them, Lloyd followed up, blasting her to the ground. Yet, the daggers persisted, revealing that the fallen assassin was merely a clone among many. Meanwhile, outside, a Walmart Godzilla was trashing the temple while Isolde and the other adventurers frantically fought against smaller hordes of invading monsters. At the same time inside, the assassin finally introduced herself as Black Crow, a bounty hunter sent by some dude named Roland. With time against them, Roland instructed Iris to proceed with the ritual, while they handled the assassin with terrible fashion sense. However, as Iris attempted to erect a new barrier, she discovered a powerful force obstructing it. Suspecting the cause, she asked Black Crow if she was in possession of the Staff of Holy Destruction. Instead of replying, Black Crow whipped out the staff like a flex, confirming she had the demon-slaying stick from 200 years back, stashed by Roland's kingdom. Lloyd, at that moment, figured that as long as the weapon was not destroyed, a new barrier could never be erected around the tower. Just then, Black Crow made it known that the whole commotion of the barrier was only a trap to lure Iris to the tower so she could be captured. Without delay, Black Crow wasted no time making a move for Iris to slit her throat. But Ophelia intercepted the attack just in the nick of time, saving Iris. To protect Iris, Lloyd swiftly conjured an impenetrable force field around Iris, encasing himself inside, too. And since protective magic couldn't coexist with offensive spells, he announced to Ophelia and Nero that they'd have to handle the fight. Ophelia and Nero wasted no time unleashing holy slashes, and Nero slash against Black Crow and her clowns. Seeing how effective Ophelia and Nero were as a team, Black Crow retaliated with a thick smokescreen to blur their vision, then activated an illusion technique called Future and Past. At that moment, Ophelia hallucinated herself on a battlefield, exhausted, eating pastries given to her by Nero, though, in reality, this gluttonous warrior munched on a clone's head. Ominously, Black Crow explained that the illusion manifested a person's deepest desire, trapping them in an endless dream impossible to escape from if they succumbed. It didn't take long for Nero to also get caught in the illusion. Nero envisioned his early days as Iris's chef, and his only desire was to fulfill his duty by whipping out delicious meals for her to enjoy. With his two MVPs stuck in La La Land, Lloyd faced a big-brain decision: break the protective barrier to fight Black Crow, or keep Iris safe and pray the squad snapped out of it. Meanwhile, in his illusion, Nero was deep in his chef mode, thinking he was feeding Iris by hand. But in truth, he overwhelmed a clone to near death, forcing Black Crow to dispel his vision. With Nero freed, Lloyd shouted from within the barrier, urging him to cook, as cooking turned Nero into a fighting machine. Perplexed, Nero asked for ingredients, and Lloyd promptly tossed him a box. Nero immediately began cooking mid-battle, and in the process, Ophelia snapped out of her illusion and, in an attempt to escape, smashed the Staff of Holy Destruction. The staff shattered on impact, and instantly, a new barrier began enveloping the tower. Instantly, the rampaging Jurassic reject got swallowed by the barrier, and the smaller monsters poofed out of existence. Simultaneously, at the depth of the tower, Lloyd and his team prepared a counterattack, having eliminated every clone, leaving only Black Crow. Realizing she was outnumbered, outplayed, and out of options, she decided to go full Super Saiyan, absorbing the power of her fallen clones for a last-ditch power-up. However, before she could finish her villain transformation, Lloyd activated Super Physical Enhancement, boosting his speed, and punched her so hard she became one with the wall. Defeated, Black Crow was apprehended, and Isolde declared she'd be sent to the capital for trial. Before departing, however, Lloyd demanded to know why there was even a bounty on Iris in the first place. Irritated but too beaten to be smug, Black Crow confessed that the Holy Roland Kingdom's prince sought Iris's death because she was standing in the way of his evil master plan. Alarmed, Iris deduced that the Roland prince's true aim was to spark a war with their kingdom. So she urgently pleaded with Lloyd to join her on a journey to the capital to thwart the invasion. But upon hearing this, Lloyd froze, knowing the capital was precisely where the short witch that tormented his life, Ruby, resided. The prince of the Roland Kingdom harbored a deep problem. He'd always been obsessed with war like he was Napoleon's unwanted stepchild. During a past council meeting, he demanded they conquer every tiny neighboring country just to bulk up their army against demons. However, Iris, then a saintess, opposed his sinister plan, arguing that such actions made them no better than the demons from 200 years ago. Consequently, due to her persistent resistance, the prince branded her a fraud and banished her. Now, in the present, Iris proposed that forming alliances with other nations was the only way to thwart Roland's invasion. Readily, Isolde endorsed her plan and noted she'd need to notify the queen. Several days later, the team arrived at the kingdom's capital, where folks dressed flashier than Jaden Smith on a red carpet. Upon meeting the miniature queen, she immediately praised Isolde for defending the Temple of Wind against Black Crow. But Iris wasn't about the formalities. She cut straight to the chase, alerting the queen that the Roland prince had plotted war against their kingdom. Mid-sentence, however, the queen noticed Lloyd, who tried desperately to blend into the background and demanded to know who the stickman nobody was. Nervously, Lloyd introduced himself as an assistant mage, prompting the council to instantly recognize him as Ruby, the alchemist's notorious errand boy with a dismal 40% material collection rate. Before they could roast him any harder than life already had, Iris jumped in to save his dignity, casually dropping that Lloyd had defeated Black Crow. Upon hearing this, the tacky council immediately argued that there was no chance Lloyd, the biggest disappointment on Earth, could defeat the formidable Black Crow. Right then, in front of Iris and Isolde, the room erupted with insults, hurling unimaginable names at Lloyd. The queen immediately silenced their filthy, insultive mouths and then decreed that the only way to verify Iris's claim was for Lloyd to duel the kingdom's most refined knight commander, the Dandelion Knight of 100 Flowers. Lloyd, upon hearing this, immediately spiraled into depression, and though Isolde tried to rally him, not even a promise to have a taste of her milkshakes could lift his spirits. In the end, Sophilia was the one who snapped him out of his self-pity, reminding him he had protagonist privileges and needed to act like it. Fueled with resolve, Lloyd charged at the Dandelion Knight with superhuman speed. The scene shifted to Ruby in her apartment, meeting with Crowley, a top mage from the Magic Association. This Crowley, a hero who'd helped defeat the Demon King 200 years ago, now lived quietly in the countryside yet remained revered as the association's finest. Ruby, being the scheming gremlin she was, wanted to recruit Crowley for some side quests and, naturally, resorted to bribery. She whipped up some homemade cookies and tea, hoping to boost her approval rating. Clumsily, however, she tripped and nearly gave Crowley a first-degree burn with scalding tea. Crowley immediately activated a barrier that shielded him, but he still managed to get a taste of her creamy tea and hated it. Getting down to business, Crowley agreed to help with one request, which was to gather alchemy materials, which made Ruby happy despite her initial flop at hospitality. But then, Crowley took a look at her shopping list and saw that she wanted a phantom flower, the kind that only blooms in a death zone where even 1,000 knights would get clapped in under 24 hours. Politely, Ruby asked if she could get next-day delivery, to which Crowley, astonished, replied that even materials from safer areas took a week to gather, let alone from such a treacherous zone. Mistakenly, Ruby's pea-sized brain assumed Crowley was lamenting because of the distance, so she suggested he use her teleportation circle to reach the site. In response, Crowley acknowledged that he liked the fact that Ruby was passionate about alchemy, but she needed to at least stop being a greedy leprechaun and consider others. More firmly, Crowley warned that the uncharted area where the flower grew was so deadly that even the Hulk would never survive a day. Smirking in disbelief, Ruby retorted that Crowley's old age must have messed with his senses, and then informed him that her former assistant, Lloyd, used to venture into the area almost every time like it was McDonald's, and at all times always returned with her needs met. Crowley remarked that if what she said was true, her former assistant must be a chronicle mage and was no match for him. Stunned, Ruby fell silent for over a minute, reeling at the thought that Lloyd, the bumbling fool, could be a chronicle mage. She recalled nights they'd shared when Lloyd whimpered like a scared little wuss, terrified of the dark. Totally convinced Crowley was nut. Ruby scoffed, accusing him of concocting excuses to mask his own incompetence. Ruby roasted Crowley, asking how he could call himself the best when he was really just a washed-up old man with 0 balls. Crowley, now radiating pure fury, had had enough. He told Ruby he wouldn't take that level of disrespect from an underdeveloped flat plywood and demanded she retract her words. Ruby, however, doubled down, saying she'd rather eat dog poop than apologize to an incompetent mage. Enraged by this, Crowley moved to react, but suddenly, a searing light burst from within him, scorching him from the inside, and he collapsed dead, charred like overcooked beef. Bewildered, Ruby stood frozen, unable to grasp what had occurred, and just then, soldiers stormed the tower, demanding answers about the explosion. Meanwhile, in the Roland kingdom, a messenger entered the palace, reporting breaking news to the royals that Black Crow had been defeated. Shocked, the old advisor lamented his grave error in entrusting the holy staff of destruction to Black Crow, mistaking her for a skilled assassin when she was merely an eastern thug. Furiously, Prince Geese slammed his staff to the ground, reasoning that Iris was merely postponing the inevitable. In the next scene, it was declared that Lloyd had defeated the Dandelion Knight, convincing the Queen of Iris's claims about Lloyd defeating Black Crow. With that, the Queen resolved to convene a meeting to determine the next steps against Prince Geese's invasion. But Iris begged her not to mobilize the army just yet in the interest of the citizens, claiming what happened at the Temple of Wind was just a mere provocation. The Queen caved, but then announced that the kingdom would cooperate with other allied nations to place a trade restriction on the kingdom of Roland. On exiting the castle, Iris thanked Lloyd and Isolde for their help. Isolde, however, flexing her rich kid card, suggested that while staying in the capital for the time being, Iris and Lloyd could use her family vacation home as their Airbnb. With their goal in the capital accomplished, Iris's servants requested permission to rest for the day and stated they'd entrust Iris to Lloyd's care. Additionally, Isolde mentioned she'd head to the Adventurers Guild and encouraged Lloyd and Iris to go sightseeing, to which they agreed. Wandering the capital streets like fugitives, Iris and Lloyd marveled at a towering roller coaster, which Iris dubbed the Magical Traveling Fair. As they rode the dragon-shaped ride, Lloyd remarked that he recalled a time he'd clung to a dragon for a full day while battling it. As twilight descended during their street walk, Lloyd asked Iris about her plans for the future if they averted the war. Curiously, he inquired whether she'd return as Roland's saint or seek happiness elsewhere. In response, Iris opened up about her past to Lloyd. Iris explained that at birth, a bishop recognized her talent for holy magic, and because of that, she was placed in an educational institute as a saint candidate. Furthermore, she noted that since other candidates vied for the same role, they underwent history and politics classes, with only the top performer chosen as a saint. Moreover, Iris revealed that her drive to become a saint stemmed from a desire to protect her loved ones, like her mother arranging market goods, her brothers toiling in fields, her father struggling as a knight, and all those enduring Roland's harsh lands. However, in the end, because of the misunderstanding she had with Prince Geese, she was ultimately banished for Roland's, and her servants decided to leave with her bows. They believed she was in the right. Iris added that returning as a saint might be challenging, but she longed to live with those dear to her. Moved by her sad story, Lloyd, simping harder than a K-drama lead actor, vowed to do anything to ensure her happiness. Meanwhile, under the glow of a dark and foreboding moon, Ruby was living her Orange is the New Black Nightmare, locked up for Crowley's death. Once a top alchemist, now just some random inmate. While enduring the disgrace of a prominent figure reduced to trash in her cell, she encountered Black Crow and her mentally deranged clones, also imprisoned. Black Crow, ever the opportunist, immediately saw potential in Ruby and suggested they break out together. She reasoned if she brought Roland's top alchemist back home, maybe her punishment for failing at the Temple of Wind wouldn't be as severe. Ruby agreed to the jailbreak, but highlighted their locked prison predicament. Black Crow mysteriously pulled a key from nowhere and unlocked her cell. Ruby suggested using the teleportation circle back at her crib, a plan Black Crow accepted, and together they fled the prison. The next morning, just as Lloyd and Iris were settling into their vacation home, they got an urgent summons to the castle. On getting there, the Queen informed them that a murder had occurred in the royal capital, with the suspect and Black Crow escaping prison. The Queen further disclosed that garrison troops at the border had been attacked, clear indications that the Roland kingdom had begun its invasion. Iris proposed returning to Roland and try appealing to Prince Geese, but Mars immediately shut down the idea, stating that it would be impossible to enter the city with the army stationed at the border. Iris countered that it might be harder for all of them to enter the city, but with her alone, she might probably pull it off. At that moment, Lloyd had an epiphany and recalled that with the teleportation circle at Ruby's crib, it might be safer to get to Roland. But then again, he realized that going to Ruby's crib would only mean one thing, and that was he would have to confront the unhinged rat, Ruby. Determined, Lloyd tried revealing the plan to the team and then started shaking like a faulty iPhone on vibrate mode. He dropped to the ground, fuming from the mouth, and was gently laid on the bed. As the team speculated about what Lloyd intended to say before his dramatic fainting, Iris remarked that she wished she could peer into his mind. Overhearing this, the Queen signaled 2 attendants to fetch a device and explained that she'd once confiscated a demon tool capable of entering someone's mind. The Queen further clarified that if Iris slept beside Lloyd while wearing it, she could access his deepest thoughts. Iris agreed to use the machine even though she had no idea what to expect, and as she slept close to Lloyd, her consciousness immediately entered Lloyd's mind, finding his essence in an atelier. Meanwhile, Lloyd's essence was in Ruby's atelier, getting tormented by a monstrous version of Ruby. Monster Ruby labeled him worthless and slow-brained, which made Lloyd cry worse than a child. But then, like divine intervention, Iris appeared, looking more angelic than she deserved. She called out to Lloyd before scolding monstrous Ruby for insulting and berating such an amazing mage like Lloyd. Annoyed, monstrous Ruby asked her to shut her hooker mouth and then mentioned that Lloyd was nothing but a piece of trash, not even worthy enough to scratch her itchy back. In response, Iris snapped, asking Ruby to release Lloyd from her torment, and then attacked Ruby with her water dragon. But just when she thought she had defeated the evil menace, Ruby was back like she never left, making Iris realize that in the world of imagination, brute force would not work. As she considered a different approach, Lloyd started his usual pity party, ranting about how everyone wanted him to man up, but he was just a scared chicken. Lloyd begged Iris to dip and leave him in his misery, but she told him to shut up and accept help. Iris reminded Lloyd that life isn't a solo campaign and real ones ask for backup when they need it. Finally, Lloyd swallowed his pride, reached out, and took Iris's hand. Suddenly, Iris leveled up into a literal giant, grabbed Ruby like an annoying Harley Quinn toy, and stuffed her into a glass jar. With that, Lloyd woke up and revealed to the team that he'd meant to mention earlier about the teleportation circle in Ruby's atelier. Wasting no time, the squad made a beeline for Ruby's atelier. Lloyd, sweating bullets at the thought of seeing his unhinged former boss, hesitated at the door but eventually knocked. Instead of Ruby's gremlin answering, a knight popped out, inquired about his identity, and stated that the atelier was off-limits to the public. Stepping forward, Isolde questioned why, and soon, the team gained entry, where the soldier disclosed that the owner faced a murder investigation. Lloyd, naturally, saw this as the perfect excuse to dip, but Isolde insisted they use the teleportation circle since they were already there. Isolde confidently declared that since she'd left her guild in capable hands, she would personally tag along with Roland. Sephilia also volunteered, and after getting the green light from Teru, Iris joined the squad. With everyone assembled, Lloyd lined everyone up, announcing that he'd teleport them one by one because the last thing they needed was a freak teleportation accident where someone ended up with their torso in a tree. Meanwhile, Ruby and Black Crow trekked toward Roland, with Ruby grumbling about the cold. Suddenly, a soldier spotted Black Crow and arrested both her and Ruby in handcuffs. The soldier ordered them to remain silent unless permitted and declared they'd been sentenced to death. At the same time, at the castle of the Kingdom of Roland, a messenger puffed up Prince Geese's ego by reporting that the attack at their enemy's front was progressing well. This pleased Prince Geese's heart, so he cheerfully told the new saint, Ezekiel, standing beside him, that the unification of the continent was the wish of his late father, the king, who was assassinated by demons, and only when he fulfilled that dream would he be able to succeed the throne. Affectionately, with Saint Ezekiel cozied up on his lap like his sugar baby, Prince Geese thanked her for her support and understanding, unlike Iris, his former saint who defied his every decree. Just then, as another messenger reported Black Crow's capture, Black Crow attempted to explain that despite failing to assassinate Iris, she'd bagged an opposition VIP instead. But Prince Geese ordered her to silence her excuses, dismissed her as a pitiful failure, and decreed that both she and her so-called important captive would face execution. As the prince commanded the guards to take them away, Ruby wailed, pleading for to be let go. Desperately, Ruby argued that coming there was a fatal error on her part, and then bragged of being her kingdom's top alchemist. Intrigued, Ezekiel asked the guards to halt, begged the prince to be merciful, and then asked that the girls be entrusted to her. Several hours later, Ruby and Black Crow received pardons and joined other reprieved prisoners. Here, they met a squad of fellow losers, a bishop who supported Iris, a clown whose whack Comedy Central career got him jailed, and a creep who'd skinned a young woman alive. As they awaited Saint Ezekiel alongside Ruby and Black Crow, pondering her intentions, Ezekiel entered with a hellhound on steroids. Ezekiel announced that she had an interest in alchemy and would need their slave assistance. Handing them a list of materials to gather, Ezekiel watched as one idiot lamented that most items lay in unexplored regions. Before the goat could finish grumbling, however, Ezekiel's beast crushed him into a paste. Coldly, Ezekiel clarified that she wasn't requesting their compliance, she was commanding it, and failure to return with all materials meant death. In the next scene, Ruby, Black Crow, and the remaining prisoners trudged toward the unexplored area with backpacks, heading for the unexplored area. Upon reaching the unexplored area where the holy power did not reach, Ruby, pissed beyond words, snapped at Black Crow for dragging her into this mess. Black Crow, for once, had nothing to say because even she was shook at how Ezekiel, with her angelic choir girl face, had proven to be more wicked and evil than the devil himself. Suddenly, mid-argument, a ferocious three-headed Chinhuahuasaurus attacked, scaring the living daylight out of Ruby. Instantly, the beast lunged at them, and just as Ruby spotted a cave for refuge, Black Crow frantically warned that it was no cave but another monster's mouth. Black Crow tried using her clones to distract the Chinhuahuasaurus, but the monster munched on every one of them like they were chicken thighs. Things went from bad to hellish when Ruby tripped like a classic horror movie victim. Before she could even get back on her feet, the Chihuahua Dino thingy swallowed her whole. Inside the mouth of the beast, Ruby reflected on every time she'd belittled and mistreated Lloyd, and rather than remorse, those memories fueled her to stab the beast's palate, forcing the creature to spit her out like expired milk before it fled. Meanwhile, within a Roland Kingdom cottage, Lloyd and his team emerged from the teleportation portal. With the first phase of their plan complete, Iris asked Lloyd how he intended to stop Prince Geese. Lloyd displayed a tiny item box and explained he planned to trap the prince inside and transport him back to their kingdom for leverage. Skeptically, the team questioned how a full-grown man with extra-large sausage could fit in such a small container. But Iris cleared their doubts by informing them that the item box was a master-grade magic item that could only be used by a handful of people and was very effective. Yet, as the team stepped outside the cottage, Ezekiel secretly observed them through a wild beast's magical gaze. The team eventually got to know a familiar was spying on them, and Isolde swiftly dispatched it. Urgently, Iris informed the team that Prince Geese awaited inside the cathedral and pressed them to hurry. Meanwhile, inside the cathedral, Ezekiel reported to Geese that Iris had returned to Roland, this time with a band of freaks. Enraged by the death of her familiar, Ezekiel commanded the knights to pursue Iris and her raggedy squad of freaks and leave not even a single soul alive. Eventually, Lloyd and his team reached the cathedral's front entrance, but found it heavily guarded. Impulsively, Lloyd activated his magic circle to obliterate the security, but Isolde restrained him, sternly warning him that using such power on humans was forbidden. Isolde added that a single strike could kill a civilian instantly and suggested they sneak in undetected. With that, Isolde and Sephilia ambushed the guards, donning their armor as disguises. Likewise, the rest of the team secured their own disguises, enabling them to slip inside the cathedral. However, as they ventured deeper, nervously trying to blend in, they bumped into two knights of the cathedral, who mistook them for genuine guards and demanded to know why they had left their security post. After a tense, awkward pause, Sephilia stepped forward, claiming they'd heard of a disturbance in the library and were on their way to investigate. However, the nosy, persistent knight insisted on tagging along to check. While heading to the library, the loud-mouthed knights kept yapping about the intruders plotting to storm the castle, oblivious that they escorted those very intruders. The knights who couldn't keep their mouths shut even for a minute, but kept ranting about Isolde and Sephilia, who used to be holy knights but had decided to be traitors. Unable to bear it any longer, Iris threw caution to the wind, and ice speared the blabbering fools to the cathedral's rooftop. Soon, word of the slain knights reached Ezekiel, alerting her that Iris and her team had infiltrated the cathedral. Promptly, she unleashed a horde of magic monsters to track them down. At the same time, Lloyd dispatched the monsters guarding the entrance of the prison, and as the team entered the prison, they found some members of the Adventurers Guild that had been imprisoned unlawfully. The one-eyed adventurer explained that they'd been captured after taking a job near the border. The guy further revealed that Prince Geese unlawfully detained citizens from other kingdoms, forcing them into perilous tasks where monsters devoured them. To rescue the prisoners, Lloyd immediately instructed them to get into his item box, which they hurriedly did. Just then, Lloyd spotted a heavily bolted, mysterious door and, curious if it held captives, smashed it open to find a bound, emaciated child. The team freed the frail, toothpick-shaped girl, and in the process, Lloyd detected that the girl had an unmatched quantity of magical reserves and concluded she must be a magician from another country that had been captured. Meanwhile, Iris, nearly in tears, struggled to fathom the prince's craziness extending to tormenting children. Fueled by these horrors, Lloyd resolved more fiercely than ever to stop Prince Geese at all costs. Suddenly, the Cathedral Knights discovered their presence in prison, and as Lloyd and his team fled through a tunnel, they found themselves surrounded by knights and Ezekiel's monsters. At that moment, Ezekiel, via magic, learned that her knights and beasts sent to ambush Lloyd's team had been defeated. Realizing Lloyd and his crew weren't easy prey, Prince Geese summoned his elite army unit to the cathedral bridge leading to his inner sanctum. But just then, thick vines burst from the ground, ensnaring the knights guarding the bridge and stunning Geese. To his dismay, the entire cathedral became entwined with vines, and just then, Lloyd and Iris emerged from hiding, demanding Geese surrender peacefully. Infuriated, Geese accused Iris of aligning with demons to tip the scales against humanity. However, Iris defiantly retorted that Geese merely feared his sinister plan unraveling and proclaimed that she and her team aimed to protect the people from a tyrant like him, which was a true saint's duty. Angrily, Iris shouted that Geese would have to defeat them to even dream of ruling the kingdom. As those words echoed, an energy blast hurtled toward them, but Lloyd conjured a barrier just in time to shield them. Dramatically, it emerged that Ezekiel had launched the attack, declaring she'd arrived to grant Iris's wish by crushing her and her team. Without hesitation, Ezekiel unleashed a ferocious torrent of wind called Delta Force directly at Lloyd and Iris. Swiftly, Lloyd conjured a force field, protecting himself and Iris. This devastating wind nearly demolished the cathedral, thrilling Ezekiel as she marveled at how impressive her attack was. Yet, she stood stunned when she realized Lloyd and Iris emerged unscathed. In retaliation, Lloyd activated a cyclone and, noticing a fleeting opening, he swiftly followed with physical engagement, trading blows with Ezekiel. Simultaneously, Prince Geese and Iris clashed in a fierce duel of ice spears and fireballs. Alarmed by Iris's ferocity, Geese remarked that he'd never imagined she'd come to destroy him, to which Iris clarified that her goal was not to destroy him, but to capture him alive. As the battle escalated, Geese fired water bullets at Iris, but she countered with a water dragon that effortlessly devoured his projectiles. Impressed, Geese demanded to know who the heck taught her that move, and Iris replied that Lloyd had taught her. Infuriated, Geese questioned whether Iris obeyed everything Lloyd said since she'd never heeded his own words. At that moment, Geese began recalling when Iris first arrived at the castle as a saint and how he had initially envisioned she would be the perfect partner to help him rule. With that hope, he'd assigned her a personal maid, Tiru, to tend to her needs and a chef to prepare delectable meals. In the present, these memories fueled Geese's rage, prompting him to shout at Iris that she was just a clueless brat. He had helped, thinking she could be special, but she turned out to be just a disappointment. Amid their watery battle, Iris retorted that he could gaslight all he wanted, but his words no longer wounded her. Relentlessly, Geese listed reasons why Iris failed as a saint and could never co-rule a kingdom with him. Eventually, his gaslighting took effect, and in that brief moment of distraction, Geese landed a cheap shot, blasting her into the ground with a tidal wave. However, just as he assumed victory, Iris, wounded and grounded, admitted that all Geese said might be true. Rising with blood streaking her face, Iris resolutely declared that she was merely a simple, learning country girl, and Geese should have voiced his grievances instead of banishing her. Iris admitted her shortcomings in serving Geese had caused him to become raving madman. While readying her next move, Iris asserted that because of this, and as her water dragon engulfed Geese, she completed the statement that she had returned to stop him. With Geese trapped in a massive water bubble, Iris shouted Lloyd's name, signaling that Geese had been captured. Instantly, Lloyd, mid-battle with Ezekiel, activated physical enhancement and zoomed over to Iris like the Flash. In one swift motion, Lloyd summoned his item box, popped it open, and Geese, in his watery prison, got sucked in like soggy noodles. With their hostage secured, Lloyd and Iris climbed their way out of the cathedral like Wonder Woman and Captain America escaping an explosion. Once the tension subsided, Iris finally let her emotions spill out. She admitted she was embarrassed Lloyd had heard Geese's humiliating talk about her failures. But Lloyd, like the perfect Riz man, gently took her hand, making her heart do somersaults, and said she'd often seen him make a fool of himself 100 times, so witnessing her imperfections brought him comfort. Meanwhile, as Ruby and Black Crow scoured the unexplored area for materials, they confronted a colossal monster barreling toward the Roland kingdom. At the same time, just outside the castle, Iris warned Lloyd that the item box teetered on the brink of bursting from all the humans crammed inside. And before Lloyd could respond, it shattered, spilling its contents. However, upon spotting Iris cradling the frail, emaciated child, Ezekiel erupted in fury and charged at her to snatch the child. But Iris dodged her grab like she had Spidey instinct. Desperately, Ezekiel declared she no longer cared about the smug brat of a prince, but demanded the child and threatened to end their lives if they refused. Firmly, Lloyd rejected her demand, insisting he'd never surrender a defenseless child to a knucklehead like her. Infuriated by his words, Ezekiel's rage boiled over, causing her to sprout horns, revealing that she'd been a demon the whole time. Stunned, Lloyd and Iris struggled to believe Ezekiel was a demon cosplaying as a saintess. Before they could process the shock, Ezekiel launched an assault on them. Instantly, Lloyd gripped his staff and unleashed a powerful atomic explosion, blasting Ezekiel with devastating force. Surprisingly, Ezekiel emerged unscathed from the blast like she had premium plot armor and charged at Lloyd. Bravely, Lloyd defended with his staff, but Ezekiel's immense pressure forced him downward, crashing to the cathedral's base like a meteor shower. Seeing that she was evenly matched with Lloyd, Ezekiel demanded to know what training had forged his strength. In response, Lloyd explained that he gathered materials and bench-pressed helicopters in uncharted territories like the sand dunes. Amazed, Ezekiel's eyes widened as she excitedly noted she'd also trained in the dunes for ages. Ezekiel, astonished, admitted she'd never thought a human would venture into the dunes and make it out alive. In a moment of reflection, Ezekiel recounted that she was the very first subordinate of the Demon Lord. Yet, when the Demon Lord deemed her weak, she was banished to the treacherous dunes for 1,000 years to train. Day after day, she endured scorching sun, barely clinging to life. Interrupting, Lloyd shared that he also had to undergo similar treatment after being forced to go there time and time again by Ruby to gather materials. Resuming her tale, Ezekiel explained that surviving on monster flesh in the dunes fueled her growing hatred for the Demon Lord. Eventually, after a millennium of training, the Demon Lord welcomed her back and granted her the highest honor. But too late, because the loyalty she had for the Demon Lord had all eroded. Driven by vengeance, she betrayed the Demon Lord, backstabbed her, and paralyzed her for easy capture. Shockingly, Ezekiel revealed that the malnourished child Iris held in her arms was the Demon Lord's shadow. Furthermore, Ezekiel confessed that for years, she had been hiding among the humans, eagerly waiting for the perfect chance to strike. Elaborating, she admitted to manipulating monsters, deceiving the prince, and posing as Roland's saintess, yet still failing to fulfill the Demon Lord's mission to eradicate humanity. When asked why she was desperate to fulfill the role of the Demon Lord, Ezekiel clarified that only by doing so could she outshine the Demon Lord and exact true revenge. After listening attentively to Ezekiel's psychotic tale, Lloyd remarked that even though it was a touching tale, he would never be in support of tricking the prince to fulfill her mad vendetta and, in the process, ruin the lives of millions of people. Defiantly, Ezekiel countered that she'd hoped Lloyd, a fellow Dunes survivor, would understand her motives. Ezekiel further warned that since Lloyd had thwarted her revenge, she promised that next time, she wouldn't just be talking. She'd be wiping out entire kingdoms, and this time, no human would be alive to stop her. Meanwhile, between the unexplored land's boundaries and the cathedral, Ruby and Black Crow observed the colossal monsters gaining entry inside the cathedral. Just as they were processing the horror show, some oversized, feathered demon decided Ruby's back looked like a scratching post and slashed her with claws sharper than her attitude. Back at the main battlefield, Ezekiel hopped onto one of the monstrous behemoths and demanded Lloyd hand over the starved Demon Lord child. Defiantly, Lloyd refused to comply with her command. Realizing Lloyd would not cave without a fight, Ezekiel directed 2 hellhounds to target him, identifying him as the primary obstacle. Relentlessly, the monsters unleashed powerful mystical energy at Lloyd, but Lloyd conjured protective magic, erecting an impenetrable barrier that withstood the blast. Ezekiel, thinking she'd just wiped Lloyd off the face of the earth, smirked, only for that smirk to die the second she saw Lloyd standing there, completely unfazed, with the cathedral still in one piece. Just then, Iris warned Lloyd that 2 monster birds were about to cheap shot him. Since he couldn't react in time, she handled it herself, launching ice spears that turned those birds into frozen Thanksgiving dinners. With more bird monsters swarming from all directions, Ezekiel cackled maniacally and taunted Lloyd, reminding him that fighting against overwhelming numbers of monsters should bring back fond memories of the dunes. Meanwhile, noticing the explosion rocking the cathedral, Isolde and Sephilia, who'd been standing guard, wondered what the heck was going on. Just as they prepared to rush in, a stampeding monster nearly flattened them into pancakes. But Isolde pulled out a last-minute barrier, saving both their skins. At that moment, Isolde declared they weren't about to just sit around watching in 4K. They needed to help Lloyd ASAP. As they charged toward the cathedral, Sephilia suddenly stumbled on Isolde's soft cheeks and complained of hunger. The glutton explained that Isolde smelled like sweet candy, and she couldn't help but get distracted. To shut her up, Isolde promised to bake the world's biggest cake after the fight. And that was all the motivation Sephilia needed to start obliterating every unfortunate monster in her path. Isolde also rallied the knights to join in the fight, and at that moment, they were able to bring down one of Ezekiel's huge monsters. Unexpectedly, an arrow came out of nowhere, piercing a monster bird trying to breach Lloyd's barrier. Everyone turned just in time to see an overinflated balloon burst open, revealing Mars and Lyra, sweaty and panting like they just ran a marathon. Shocked and curious, Lloyd demanded to know how Mars and Lyra had managed to infiltrate the battlefield. The duo explained that they had initially snuck inside his item box when he was leaving for the capital. That wasn't even all. One-eyed Saitama and his Smeagol brother also suddenly burst out from the item box, ready to join in the fight. Everyone teamed up like the Avengers, and together, they attacked the monster with unrelenting determination. Realizing Ezekiel's downfall would bring an end to the fight, Isolde, on behalf of the team, announced to Lloyd to attack Ezekiel while she and the rest dealt with the monsters. Lloyd agreed to the plan, and as he prepared to attack, Ezekiel somehow figured out his plan and immediately rallied her monsters around her. But while the rest of the team went head-to-head against the monsters, Iris, from the side, blasted Ezekiel with sharp ice spears, which she managed to deflect. But in that slight moment of distraction, Lloyd, with the confidence of his friends backing him up, lunged an attack at Ezekiel, and together they blasted her with a massive explosion that would take out half the continent. Fortunately, the attack did damage, leaving Ezekiel holding her guts in intense agony. Just then, a voice from behind inquired how long someone intended to hold on. Turned out it was none other than Ruby, who was dropped to the ground by a monster bird with black crow astride it. At that moment, Ruby spotted Lloyd and called out his name. Turning, Lloyd froze, stunned to see his toxic ex, and noticing the tension, Ezekiel grinned wickedly like an evil vampire. How would Ruby's appearance affect Lloyd in this dire moment? Comment my evil alchemist if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.